So thank you everyone for joining me, Jem Bendell. I'm a professor of sustainability leadership at the University of Cumbria, and I'm also the founder of the Deep Adaptation Forum, which is an international space for people to come together and work out what do we do now. So it's for people who have varying levels of collapse anticipation, and they want to engage with others positively to work out what does that mean for their own lives, their community, their organization, their politics, and so on. So that's the gathering here, and I'm really pleased we've got 20 people from the Deep Adaptation Forum who are joining me in this Deep Adaptation Leadership Q&A. So thank you everyone for coming. I'm just going to say a few words to start. I did send everyone my lecture on basically an introduction to a critical view on leadership. And so I hope some of you have seen that. And if people are watching afterwards, then I recommend you have a look at that, and it'll make this, the way I answer questions will probably make a lot more sense if you see that lecture first. But I'd just like to set the scene, because a lot of people say you can't think it's too late to prevent dangerous climate change, because then people will just give up. And we've heard that, I've heard that throughout my life, and I've heard that since the Deep Adaptation paper came out, and I've heard that more and more from people as as collapse anticipation spreads. There's that resistance, there's that sense that it'll lead to despair and therefore apathy. And very little research is actually used to back up that. I just want to share with you some of the research we did. So I'll just do a share screen. Here we go. So I did some research with my colleague in the Deep Adaptation Forum, Dorian Cave, who's doing a PhD with me. And we asked people, respondents in the Deep Adaptation Forum, where did they think they were seeing leadership on this agenda? And you can see here from the responses that it's interesting that people engaged in this do have a very interesting perspective on leadership and where it comes from. So you see here that the volunteers without formal authority, they're seeing a lot of leadership happening there. But also people are saying, almost half of the people who responded said that, well, chose out of the list that they actually have noticed their own leadership. Now, of course, people have different ideas of what that means, but it shows you at least that people are not sort of looking at this and going, oh, yeah, the end of the world is nigh, and I'm just going to watch TV and drink or something. So there's a lot of that spirit of positive engagement, and that's been what's impressed me and affected me so much since the Deep Adaptation paper came out, which is that this is not something that can just sort of be looked at and put down. If you look at it and take it to heart, then it really does change your life. And this is sort of self-leadership inspired by collapse anticipation. In my experience, it means we're more likely to really question everything, to no longer just respect institutions and systems and existing leaders, to actually think, well, how on earth have we got into this mess? And really inquire into that. And I've noticed people also no longer postpone what's most important to them. There's a sense of an urgency and a priority around living your life fully according to your deepest truth and belief. So it's a collapse anticipation seems to be something that leads to a lot of this sort of what can be called self-leadership. So that's really, for me, key. And of course, what that then means then is it's entirely contextual. I mean, people are choosing to do all kinds of different things from that basis. But I would definitely invite people to if there's two sort of things I suggest people notice, is that are they looking at it in terms of an individualist approach? Or are they looking at how to alleviate their pain, emotional pain? Because I think individualism and pain aversion are aspects of our being that have been produced in us by our culture, and they can lead us into less curiosity and less collaboration that might be possible. So and that also is in the whole notion of leadership, the mainstream notion of leadership. And leadership is a really problematic and often counterproductive concept, because it debilitates people. Because if we assume that senior people or special people are going to be the people creating change or telling us what to do, then we can give up some of our own or our own potential authority in our own lives and in our relationships. And of course, the contrary view to that sees leadership as something that's distributed, emergent, collective somehow, is also problematic, because and it can, so the notion of leadership can distort our thinking about, well, just how can change happen? Because if everyone tries to lead and thinks that that's somehow the best thing to do, then we're in a bit of a mess. So it's really important to think of acts of leadership, so within and how groups can better work together. And it may be an act of leadership to keep quiet. It may be an act of leadership to assess when to follow, when to support. And I think what we find in so many organizations and community groups is that the assumptions around what it means to lead, and that it's always good to lead, are unhelpful for dynamic collaboration. But I do recognize that some people feel reassured in a group process, knowing that there is some leader, so a special person, someone to trust, to follow, to listen to, in order to sort of, for people to get a sense of how things are and what a group is thinking. So it's almost like an individual being a proxy for that, that broader process, and an easier way of sensing what's going on collectively. But I think it's important that we invite each of us to evolve beyond that idea, that not to trust one individual, but trust a collective, and trust the processes that are and the ethos that a collective has co-created. And so me being a figurehead of deep adaptation may have been useful in some ways to begin with, but would be counterproductive if it continues too much. And instead, I'd love it if that's substituted in future in people's imagination by a trusted collective and a trusted process, and a sense of an ethos about how people work together. So I'm going to welcome questions now on self-leadership, community leadership, organizational leadership, activist leadership, scientific leadership, political leadership. Welcome questions about leadership in general, or in the context of anticipated collapse, or in relation to the Deep Adaptation Forum in particular. Particularly as I'll be stepping away from my role in daily activities in the forum at the end of September. So I'm now going to look in the box to see if people, oh yes, 8 comments, good. Let's have a look here then. Okay, please outline the role of a group leader in DAF. Have you studied leadership from behind? What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the specific ones about DAF later. I'm going to start look for some more general ones to begin with. So I will come to that. What about DAF? Okay. I've realized that if I have to spend time reading this, then you just have to stay there sort of sitting in silence. So actually what I'm going to do is just go for it. So Sasha, all right, I'm going to just read it out, and I don't know what you've written, Sasha, but here we go. What are your reflections on the balance between actions needed, urgency and getting things done in the real world, and the time needed for the deep changes we need to remake our own way of relating to leadership and power and to the earth? Okay, we'll get started with that one then. The balance between doing and being, the balance between, yeah. So, I'm not sure I've got that balance in my own life. I certainly threw myself into action stations after I got a reaction to the deep adaptation paper, and I didn't think that that's what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be spending a lot more time and curiously looking into who am I and what's the meaning of life and those sorts of things. And it's the age old question, isn't it? I remember even Gandhi talked about it when he was asked. And he said, "Well, I know that I'm somebody who needs to do a lot of work on myself. I've got a lot of problems, and I'm not an evolved soul as I'd like to be. But we've got to kick out the British, and we've got to get on with that. So I can't just focus purely on myself." And it can't be an either or. And so we have to find ways of doing both. And so I know that I would say that's a really good question for the Deep Adaptation Forum as well. How can we encourage each of us to move into action and then retreat, action and retreat, to make sure we're looking at the doing as well as the becoming? I think the Deep Adaptation Forum at the moment has been very focused on helping people find some sense of safety for emotional processing. And so it has been very focused on being. And I do know that after a while, people have felt they've got that community, and they're somehow adjusted to having collapse in their awareness, and they want to get on and do stuff. And then they can get frustrated with the emphasis on sort of being and emotional processing. And I think not only do we want ebbs and flows between being and doing in day to day, but also recognize that people will be going through different phases. And those different phases are all fine. And we need to find ways of supporting people and connecting people who are whether more focused on the emotional inner journey, or they're more focused on the outer engagement. So Sasha, please unmute and answer your own question.
Well, I like what you said, but I'm kind of in this place myself where I'm coming to a point where people are asking me to lead more, and I want to lead more. But I'm also aware of that in itself kicking off certain patterns of relating to leadership. And, for instance, for me, I move into my head instead of staying like more connected, more grounded, and more really trying to check in with how am I actually reacting? There's so much training to not feel when I'm in the face of some pressure from the outer world. And I think even that outer world, the inner world is a very questionable construct. So.
Would anyone else like to unmute and join Sasha and me in talking about this very important question of balance, and also of how cultural stereotypes that are in us and each other maybe mean that we suddenly think, oh, we're now super responsible and we're now being looked to lead. And the positives and negatives of that, and any advice. I open the floor to anyone here. Just unmute yourself and say hi.
Hi. Yes, something that comes to me is, and I find helpful, is to discern the different roles or tasks that are going on in leadership, so that I can see maybe I'm leading something, but actually is there a role there of the person that, as Jem mentioned, who's kind of providing the safety overall holding. That's one role of leadership. It's not leadership, and there are other parts, so that the leadership roles can be shared out, and that takes away from me some of the burden of feeling like I have to have them all, and we're not used to doing that, because it's like taking away from the glory of the leader. But actually, if you break it down, I'm leading now because I'm doing this particular skill or have that capacity. So just wanted to put that in.
Yes, yes. Disaggregating leadership. In the work I do, I often, like when I teach about leadership, I invite people to think about, if they didn't have the word leadership, if we hadn't invented the word, what would we be talking about? What are the actual attributes of somebody, or their behaviors, or the outcomes? What is it that we're really talking about? And so that is useful to keep in mind, and see whether we can invite people to recognize when they're already acting in certain ways that are helping groups, but also invite people to step up. Thank you, Sasha and Sophie. I'm going to look at Paul's question now. Wonderful to see you join, Paul. Paul Bodenham.
Can I add something?
I'd like to, okay, here we go. Paul says, I'd like to explore some assumptions about knowledge for political leadership. I find that in collapse, leadership involves moving from knowing to not knowing. And Paul, you said you can explain a bit more in a moment. So what are the mental models that are being dismantled here? Is it a bit like a shift from enlightenment to quantum paradigms? Wow, you have to talk more about that as well, Paul. So yes, the way the political system exists, the way mass media, mainstream media exists, also now the way we all seem to behave online in social media, I think means that if you're a normal human being in politics, you must be totally panicked all the time. And that really structures how you can explore an issue, and let alone how you can talk about an issue in public. It's super combative. People are looking to really challenge you all the time. So it's, yeah, we still have politicians, left, right, center, all assuming that they need to talk about how they're going to make your life better. And those that seem to be more comfortable about saying, no, 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 the future's really scary, but I'm the only one who can help make it a bit less scary. They seem to be the proto-fascist populist types, who just very happy to concoct a fear rather than concoct a threat rather than actually address the real systemic problems. So politics is frighteningly bad at the moment. I wonder when we will see a politician saying, wow, I mean, the future is really scary. It's going to be very disrupted, and we don't fully know what to do. But these are a few of the ideas, and this is the way we're going to approach it. And this is why we're going to approach it that way. I wonder. I really wonder. Is every politician around the world going to turn into their own version of Comical Alley? Or Chemical Alley, whatever where you know the American troops are on the edge of Baghdad, and you can see them behind him on the with all the bombs going off in the background and him saying, no, we're totally in control, it's all fine. That probably dates me in terms of my age, remembering that. That's probably 1991 or something. But anyway, maybe that's the future for all our politicians. So, over to you, Paul. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't think, I think the situation we're in is that there are any number of scenarios that could unfold, or at least, you know, maybe we know where we're going to be in 300 years, but we don't know quite what's going to go wrong first, or, you know, how much, how soon. And so I wouldn't have thought that any politicians would, well, I think politicians would probably be right to say, well, we don't know what the future holds. And in fact, the conundrum we face, I think, is actually dismantling. I think there is some dismantling to do of our clinging to assumptions about what the future will be. And I think there are two. Actually, I think there are two ways that we need to surrender what we think we know. One is to de-know what we already know about the future. So just to, as you say, I think to highlight that the future is not going to be the same as the past, and then to move into unknowing, which is about realizing that we've got to live in a different way in context of shifts and sounds. Now, how you make decisions in that kind of context, particularly politically, is really where I'm exploring, because political decision making has hitherto required a stable state. If the environment isn't going to be stable, then the game we're into is keeping the economy stable in the face of shifts to the environment. So I wanted to just create spaces where people can say, actually, we don't know anymore. And that, is that leadership? I think that's a kind of leadership, but it's going to take some courage to say that.
So I'm sure there must be examples where someone's greatest act of leadership was by saying, I don't know, and I don't think anyone else really knows yet either. And someone could say that and be listened to because they're a senior role holder or particularly charismatic, or someone could say that, and just the fact that they were brave enough to stand up and say it is an act of leadership. But I hadn't really thought about that. I suppose actually my deep adaptation paper was deliberately not saying, so this is what we do. I felt floored by this awareness, this conclusion I'd reached. But if anyone has anything on this topic to say, please don't be shy. Unmute yourself and tell us about leading unknowing and unknowing leadership. I'd be very pleased to. So don't, just unmute yourself. Don't be shy. I'm not. Just speak.
Hello.
Yes.
Oh.
Rowan,
hello?
you started to. Oh, Stephen, we'll come to you, Stephen. Rowan started chatting first.
Okay.
So I was just going to say that I have sort of ended up in a bit of a leadership role in my local community, and I'm really keen, obviously, to use whatever assumed power I've ended up with to do good things, but I'm also really keen to not just be that old-fashioned kind of leader, hence why I'm here. One of the things which we've been doing is holding people's assemblies, and I just think they're an amazing tool for really hearing people's voices, and making that decision-making process something which the whole community is involved with, rather than just it being something that's done from the top down. And I'm just kind of, mentioning that and wondering if anyone else has any tools that also help them to just get past those sort of traditional power structures.
Yeah, so there must be tools and trainings and such like, and possibly even coaches, people who know about community level leadership. If anyone has anything to offer on that. I mean, I know Naresh Giangrande and Sophie Banks did a whole bunch of teaching of transition towns in the past, and I think perhaps some of that was in there. But anyone want to share on this one about tools for community leadership? Catherine, Kat?
Thanks, Jim. Rowan, I do lots of that kind of work, not only within my own community, but within communities all across the globe in the last 20 years. So I'd be very happy to share with you some of the tools and processes that we have been refining over that time around shared decision making and collaborative decision making.
Thank you. That's really great. Yeah, no, I mean, I found the People's Assembly process has just really changed. Learning about it has really changed my really listen to other people. So yeah, no, really keen to learn more about that. Thank you. Shall I PM you my email or something?
Good.
Super, thanks.
Good to see that. Thanks. So, Terry, I'll read your question. Stephen, I've seen that you've, unless you want to come in on this topic, otherwise I'll come to you later for your story on leadership. Okay. Unmute yourself if you wanted to comment on this topic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I did. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Stephen. You're muted. There we go.
Oh, yeah, I'm unmuted now. For me, what I've discovered is that the essence of any kind of effective leadership is a kind of tuning in that takes place that's outside of any fixed framework. And the story that I wanted to relate is a beautiful example of that. If I can.
Yeah, if Stephen,
that.
is it less than a few minutes?
It's several minutes. It's not a long time.
All right, I will ask you to draw it to a close after 3 minutes. Let's hear your story.
Okay, it involves the quote unquote leader of a peyote circle in New Mexico named Little Joe Gomez, who ended up marrying two Buddhist friends of mine many years ago. And a Hasidic rabbi was invited to attend one of the peyote meetings. And he was wearing his gabardine hat and everything. And there was a lot of grumbling going on. The tradition was you were hatless during the ceremony, and he sat there and did nothing. And little Joe sat there and did nothing. And the grumbling got very angry. They're saying he has to take the hat off or he has to leave. And again, neither one of them moved or said a word. And this went on for 20 minutes or so, and it got quite angry. And finally, people started to settle down a little bit. And when there was silence, there was this kind of tired, exhausted silence. Little Joe looked up and said, "It's his head." And that was the end of that. He just said, "It's his head," and everyone laughed, and the meeting took place. And it was knowing when and how to tune in to what was happening to express something in a way that caused a resolution. And to me, that story is the essence of what any kind of effective leadership is all about. It's so hard to do.
Tuning in to know what people are thinking, or
yes,
and then a sense of what might be helpful to shift in terms of people's thinking. That's a choice you make. A question then of like the processes that go on at that moment. Like what how do I separate what I think that I want from an assessment of what I think might be useful to others or a group? On what grounds? What principles? What's my legitimacy to act in the moment? All that is a is really interesting and requires self-reflection and mindfulness, but also a desire to serve in the moment a group to achieve something. Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to Terry's question now. As I transition my DA leadership, I'm stepping back from the daily activities of the Deep Adaptation Forum at the end of September. In light of the strategy options outcomes, I'm not stepping back because of the strategy options outcomes at all. This was planned a year ago. I'm stepping back to focus on research and writing and the things that I want to do rather than operational stuff, but also because Deep Adaptation community is now more of a community and can run itself and will be better for doing that. And it'll be better if the other voices are heard more than mine. So in all sorts of ways. So the question, what sort of good leadership do I hope to see emerge from within the various Deep Adaptation groups and platforms? Thank you, Terry. We're all human, aren't we? So we've all got egos, and we all have good bad days and bad days. And we all have stressful periods in our lives and less stressful. So it's why I talk about return to curiosity, return to compassion, return to respect as being the three core principles for the ethos of Deep Adaptation Forum. Because we always fall away from that. So at times our egos will mean that we want to be heard, we want to be validated, we want to feel that we are having an impact at this stressful time for humanity, and all that stuff that can happen. It's going to always be there in all of us at times, but if we can know that that's the case, and it's not actually always that helpful to bring that, and then we can let it go and wait for it to go in others without being too judgmental. That will be really helpful for any group process, any collaboration. So it's important. I think the leadership will be people embodying that curiosity, compassion, respect, and also embodying the forgiveness in others and themselves when they slip away from that, to maintain an ethos of care and generative dialogue and trial and error. So is that leadership, or is that just more of an ethos, a way of being? I think it would be, this is where the word leadership and the concept of leadership gets problematic, because what I'm really talking about is just a lovely way of being together in groups where we recognize what goes on in each of us and how we can mess up, and trying to return to what are we trying to achieve here? How can I play my part here in this moment? So I guess I'm talking about collaboration. That means appropriate, provisional, contingent hierarchy only, where people can question and hold to account people. So power being something that we pay attention to and make sure that it doesn't just sort of congeal in certain places. And therefore people in roles where power could congeal around them to shed that, to not want that, to actually believe in that ethos of sort of dynamic collaboration. I'd like that to emerge. I know some people are more focused on going deep rather than going broad. And some people think we should be doing more work to reach out to the masses, so broad rather than deep. I would like leadership that decides that that doesn't have to be resolved, that that is an ongoing tension, or not tension, polarity or paradox, and that actually we'll sort of try and do keep both of those things in mind. My expectation is collapse anticipation will go very broad and quite quickly. So it's almost like we don't have to push it. Terry, over to you. How would you answer your question? What would you like to see in terms of leadership?
Well, first, let me say I did not mean to imply there was a connection between the strategy options dialogue and your transition in leadership. I didn't mean to imply that. There's a comma missing in my question that might have helped clarify that. I didn't see them as connected in any directly causal way. About the question, it kind of resonates back to Paul's closing question about the enlightenment to the quantum paradigms, and I'm going to try to connect that. In the discussion so far, a lot of dichotomies have emerged: inner, outer, self, other, being, doing, leading, following, et cetera, et cetera. And those, because of those there are differences there. Those are genuine dichotomies. Because of those dichotomies, collectively, we end up in these continua or spectrums of differentiation around those differences in those dichotomies. Now, this is where the epistemological dimension of Paul's question comes into play. How do we deal with those dichotomies and those spectrums and continuums and all the differences that form the dynamic through them? The way I look at the history of intellectual development in the West, since the first of the 20th century, through Russell and Whitehead's Principia Mathematica and the set theoretic basis of mathematics, we think in terms of union and intersection, and we use those differences in a more divisive way. The only thing you get in an intersection is things that are common to both. I personally have come to not trust that. What I've come to trust is more like a musical metaphor. What you get in the intersection of two musical tones is a third thing that where both of those two tones, let's say in a two-part harmony, exist in full, in spite of their differences. You get a third thing that brings them together. So that notion of resonant harmony, which actually goes all the way down to string theory and M theory and string physics today, interestingly enough, it's that notion of resonant harmony that I try to bring to the table when we talk about leadership and followership and all these things. First, there's an inner resonant harmony. That's the depth. How do I wrap my head, my heart, my soul, my mind, my spirit, my being around the truth of the collapse of the solastalgia grief that we're living with? And that, to your point, it's a rage of grief that we have to come to grips with and find a resonant harmony with, and avoid the fits of temper. And people who know me, including you, Jim, have experienced my fits of temper, for which I'm profoundly, constantly regretful. But anyway, it's when our resonant harmonies break that those fits of temper erupt out of our rages of grief, as I see them. So all of that to say, I think in terms of resonant harmony that brings things together through and in spite of their differences. And for me, that's the dynamic at work in leadership.
I liked Terry, I like your summary there. The bringing things together despite their differences, but also because of the differences, you're creating something more amazing, more powerful. And that adds another depth to what I was saying earlier, which is that, yeah, the dichotomy I mentioned, some people saying, I want us to stay small and just go deep, and other people saying, no, we need to reach out and strategize about how to suddenly, reach millions of people. Keeping that dichotomy in seeing and this actually is, this comes to another point, Terry, which is that, I think quite a lot of people in the first year and a half of the forum, connecting through the Facebook group and others, there's been a desire to express emotion and to feel less crazy and more connected. But I think perhaps now we're moving into a phase where we should welcome respectful, agonistic dialogue and disagreement, and see that as really important, and then work out how we hold space for that, where people may get a bit annoyed with each other and with themselves. And so, yeah, so because I mean, some of the modalities we do, like deep listening and the death cafes, are very much about emotional processing and being there for each other, less the intellectual sort of stuff. But one of the things that came out of the strategy options process is a desire from some people to have circles that will really talk about issues and drill down on them. And absolutely, why not have heated debates, but respectful, curious, heated debates around topics. So how do we hold all that together? Keep that beautiful ethos of deep adaptation in the forum, but also have more lively discussions where we'll all disagree with each other. Kat, you had a question of excellence in leadership, and this is a really embarrassing question that I have ignored, because oh dear, it's so depressing, isn't it? I'm a professor of leadership, and I struggle to say where I see excellence in leadership. I've experienced excellent facilitators, excellence in holding space, and for me, when I see that, I admire that, I value it, and I know that it's transformative, and I know if it's excellent in serving the group, that it's not really just about them. So yeah, that's oops, sorry for someone signed me out of my own machine there. It was a bit odd. Anyway, Zoom suddenly did something funny. So any wonderful facilitator like you, Kat, is a leader to me. There we are. Would you like to answer your own question? Unmute and...
I was just curious, Jem. I suppose, like you, I get the privilege of seeing lots of leadership in action. And I struggle to identify excellence as well. Certainly never in terms of an individual. And something you said at the very beginning really resonated for me about it's less to do with trust in the individual and more to do about trust in the process. And you know some of my background. I do a great deal of work around deliberative dialogue and principled negotiation. And so for me, it's all about process. So I only ask the question because I see aspects of excellent leadership in lots of places, but usually little aspects, which again speak to that question that Sasha raised about balance. And it's that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
People arrive in leadership role with this incredible aspiration, but how do you maintain that? How do you not respond to the expectations? Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. Thank you for coming in on that. Dean, I'm going to read out your question now and then come to you. Dean Walker, in deep adaptation, the message has been made clear quite often that there will be no shame and blame. When Dean looks at the corporate and governmental leadership that got us into our predicament, I see a severe, crippling deficit of holding leaders to account for deeply damaging policies and behaviors. So do I see a version of shame called healthy shame as a viable part of holding leaders to account versus the well-known toxic shame that is universally distasteful and shunned? How else can we motivate any positive action towards reclaiming or restoring the common? Okay, so a number of parts to the question, Dean, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it. Yes, you're right. One of my main motivations for founding the forum was when I realized that some people were reading my paper and their shock, their strong emotions were leading them to talk about in ways that were extremely angry, and they wanted to blame someone, punish someone or some collective. And I wondered whether, as more people around the world wake up to the fact that they're not going to have the future that they thought they would, and things are going to be really difficult, and then they begin to experience disruptions to their lives, there will be this natural desire to blame, which could sow the seeds of violence. And so I wanted to invite people away from that. And there were also other reactions I saw that I wanted to invite people away from, such as, well, I just need to protect my own and my family and my community and screw the rest. And so the traditional prepper story we have about, you know, grabbing a gun and stuff. So I wanted to invite people away from that as well. So but I hear you in this question about, then does that mean that we're just, we're not looking at where there is, what did you call it? A healthy shame. Well, and whether that could be part of holding leaders to account. I know that being angry at someone doesn't tend to, from what I've seen, lead to sensible action, even if the action is about trying to challenge that person. So I'd be cautious about. I want to hear from you, Dean, about what healthy shame is, but I'm still cautious about that. I would like to see. Wow, you've really got me thinking here, because I'm really impressed with Roger Hallam recently. I know that's quite a controversial thing to say recently. He's in jail right now for a couple of months. But he is so challenging. I try and say the same things very politely, but he just throws in a whole bunch of shame. So he's critiquing the British NGOs and the British NGO class of person for being to blame, in part, for a lack of truth-telling and urgency and radicalism in British political life on climate. And I see the power in that. I do see a power in that. But also, I also see that we can get stuck in that, because, you know, they're not really that powerful or important. Even if they were radical, what could they have really achieved anyway? And I see that I'm the butt of this as well, as that people, as they get agitated about the fact that everyone's talking about collapse, or not everyone, but a lot of people they know are talking about collapse, and they don't want to know, they don't want to hear that. They get more agitated, and therefore they start blaming people like us. You know, suddenly we're being counterproductive, and if there is a collapse, we're to blame because we started talking about it first. So I can see that human reaction to blame, and I can see it being problematic because it stops us really thinking creatively and usefully. And so I want to hear what you think on this, Dean. Over to you.
Well, there's a lot more than 7 minutes that I could spend on it, but I agree with a couple of the comments that are going on in the chat about it's very easy in our culture to conflate holding people to account for blaming. And here it just feels like that cripples the commitment to the truth, which I notice is not something that's repeated as often nearly here in DA as in XR. You know, and that's something I deeply admire about the XR platform, is first and foremost, tell themselves and tell each other the truth. So it's in light of that, and through some other indigenous and far more local and alternative, folksy, if you wish, interpretations of healthy shame. For instance, I did some work in Northern Ireland with a youth program years ago, and there were youth offenders that were up against 4 different kinds of militarized police in their city. And they kept offending after interactions, multiple interactions with every one of those police-like agencies. The only thing that got through to them after years, even being kneecapped by the local version of the police, the only thing that made an impact was the threat of being kicked out of the community, dissed from the community. So the incentive was, if you want to stay connected with us, the healthy shame is what you're doing is offensive to this community, and we can't have it. So you must shift if you want to stay. And it wasn't about anger. It was about elders in a supportive, loving community speaking the truth boldly, clearly to that offender, to that young member of the community. So that's just one tiny example, which we just don't hear about, because the only shame we ever hear about is the toxic stuff that's wrapped up in our global infatuation with being polarized and blaming and so on. So it's a very different incentive structure, particularly around government and corporate level, which is actually killing us at scale.
Thank you. I reckon I need to do more thinking and talking with people about this topic, and also perhaps more learning in the moment in challenging situations. So thank you. Would anyone
Thank
else
you.
like to come in on this issue? Just I'll put your hand up to and share. We've only got about 5 or so minutes together. Sasha, on this one.
Well, I think some of this is words, and I actually wouldn't use the word good shame here. Like, I think that confuses the issue. We're really talking about holding people accountable and bravely doing that from as grounded a place and as clear a place of our intention as possible. And that's work that needs to be done. So that's my feeling.
Thank you. So, Viviana, you asked a question. Is there a distinction between having a role of leadership, like being a president, versus being a leader or leading? If so, can a leader plan to become one? So can a person plan to become a leader? Or does it emerge? Does a leader emerge and become obsolete as a result of who a person is or how they live? So, and what does this mean for our transition with deep adaptation? So for me, there are 2 domains in my work on leadership and leadership development. One is the domain of challenging, unpacking unhelpful assumptions around leadership in order to help people collaborate more to achieve meaningful outcomes. And so that sees leadership as not as inhering in one person, whether they are at top of a hierarchy or the bottom, or but it's just it's a focus on how can we help create leaderful groups, how can we help groups develop ways of being, an ethos where people will step up and act in service of the group, and then not suddenly be seen as, oh, that's a natural leader, that's a true leader. They'll just step back and someone else will step forward, and it's just a fluid quality of leadership in the group. So that's one domain of my work, which is more about just groups functioning well. And that's when it's in that domain that I see good facilitation, good holding space as a real key leadership function in a group. And therefore, also by studying how facilitators work, then leaders, managers of groups could actually, or so-called leaders, could actually think about their own practice in general, outside of the group process. So, like outside the event of a group process. But there's another domain, which is we have people who have power, in terms of positions of power. We have the head of the Labour Party, the head of the British government, we have President Trump, we have the CEO of HSBC, we have the chairman of the World Economic Forum, we have the UN Secretary General, we have people in roles. There are these, and they're doing a lot of damage in a lot of cases, and also they are about to have extremely difficult decisions to make going forward. And our systems for producing humans who end up having those roles are the systems that have created the omnicide that we're living in. So the people in those roles in general are not, the probability is they're not going to be the super well-rounded, curious, reflective, earth-connected, woke folk that we might want in those roles. How to help people in positions of power to rethink their role and find ways of acting positively in a destabilizing situation, whether it's in their business, in their community, in their political party, in a government, or in an intergovernmental organization. It's a huge question, and it's one I've avoided. I prefer to work on the first domain and work with people who are coming to deep adaptation from all walks of life, and do it in a very egalitarian way. But somebody's got to start helping senior leaders, senior role holders, get their heads around the unraveling of societies, unraveling of Western civilization, and how to reduce harm in that context. It's a massive topic. It's a massive thing to be working on. Is anyone working on it here? Don't have to speak, just put your hand up and say, yeah, got that covered, Jem. Dealing with, yeah, totally helping CEOs, helping the leaders of the top political parties with all that. Yeah, there's a few hands went up there. That's good to know it's being done. Would anyone like to come in on this topic? Because we're just going to wrap up in the next 3 minutes.
Yeah, just
maybe
like
someone, okay, Sophie, and then maybe someone who hasn't said hello yet.
Somebody else go first.
I know we have a professor or two of leadership on the call.
And I'm just thinking that would be quite courageous of people like me who belong more on the other side to actually create pressure on our leaders to take time off. Like, actually, you're not fit for governing as you are. You need to sleep. You need to have time to think, reflect. How can you be wise? I mean, to sort of create a culture that actually supports, even though I don't like a lot of our leaders, but as a general, that creates health in leadership, that top leaders have some conditions to be wise, which I don't see they have at the moment.
Thank you. Jonathan Gosling, you've left a comment in here which I'll read out here. Perhaps we in the Deep Adaptation Forum are a culture characterized by charismatic enthusiasm, in which solidarity and egalitarianism are most valued. This could be contrasted with a hierarchical culture in which difference and even opposition can be valued as expressions of differing roles, positions, and interests within the grid. Would you like to say anything about what we take from this description, Jonathan?
Well, I don't know if it's an accurate description or not. You know, people may dispute it, but if it is the case, you know, within a sort of charismatic community in which likeness, agreement, being one of us is very, very important. That sort of sentience. Then, of course, shame is a very important and significant mechanism for regulating that membership, the association, the togetherness. And whereas, you know, in more formal hierarchies and bureaucracies, shame is less important, because difference of difference of opinion, difference of experience is kind of natural, because at different hierarchical levels, people are experiencing different things. Their relationship to power, to each other, is much more differentiated. Some are maybe seen as oppressed, others oppressors, or something. I don't know, but those very different, a multiplicity of experience would be there, and one might say, you know, they should be ashamed of themselves, but it's a different sense of the term shame in that. And so perhaps if, you know, as you step down and try to sort of absorb somehow from the kind of entrepreneurial, you know, the social identity theory, people have talked about this idea of an entrepreneur of identity. Is this idea that you know, maybe in founding the deep adaptation sort of movement, you acted, you know, you kind of created or found a space in which there wasn't a grid in a hierarchical sense, and nor was there a known desire for solidarity, but by representing this insight, have formed around it a kind of enthusiastic community, charismatic, enthusiastic community. And now the problem of how one you know, tolerates and allows more difference and diversity in that, and debate and discussion, exploration in other ways. And I think it's a long-standing problem, but we can see the costs of those sorts of communities that become very sort of rigid and determined to maintain their cult. And so I think it's very important that we do find other ways to do it. But I think some of it might be, I don't really know the answer to this question, I have to say, but just others may know it. It might be accepting some aspects of kind of role-defined sort of position, so that people speak from the role. And we've got it to some extent with the volunteers. Volunteers are authorized to speak from the role, as distinct from, as it were, usness, you know, on behalf of the kind of a role. We may need more of that, I suppose.
Yeah, I think. Thank you, Jonathan. That's you've articulated it better than I had heard before about the way the desire to get along and to be there for each other and all that lovely stuff can backfire. And you've also suggested some ways that you can have more constructive dissonance and more diversity of view where it's just normal. So I think that's something I'll take back to the core team as well. And also there are some key, very important volunteers on this call as well who are very active. So that's really good for them to have heard that too. Thank you everyone for joining. And I hope this has stimulated some thoughts about leadership and collaboration in general, but also in terms of deep adaptation and also in terms of the forum. And this video I will share within the Ning, so you can look back at it, and also other people in the Ning will be able to see it. So wherever you are in the world, I wish you a peaceful day, and may you have a polite, civil and constructive disagreement with someone, because I've been reminded of the importance of that through this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Cheers.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you all. Good to see you, Kat.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.